Short game wise, yes, I can. Long game wise, no. No, I have not.
He's talking the long game.
They played the long game.
They gotta play the long game.
They're experienced and they played the long game.
No, you're talking the long game.
They're experienced and they played the long game.
Very nice.
Long game is back.
All right, Case, we got an interview. We just wrapped up with Lou Stagner. I started following him on Twitter a couple years ago. Big data guy. He works with Arcos Golf. I didn't know he still has a corporate job in big data, analyzing data. He's also assistant golf coach at Princeton. What was your reaction to that conversation?
I like the fact that he's got the job in big data. That's like he's really crunching numbers, and this is kind of a side thing, which is impressive. Great interview. Someone I've followed. It's funny. I was talking to someone yesterday, actually, at a 4-year-old's birthday party, saying that we were going to talk to him today, and they didn't know who he was, but they later texted me like, "Oh, I follow that guy. I just didn't realize." He's one of those guys that just pops up in your feed, whether or not you know you're following him on Twitter. He's a great golf stat analytic guy, and he's a big proponent of not rolling back the golf ball, which I'm a fan of. So
hey, I thought that was a great. So we talked about your 10 handicap. He asked you how many birdies over under, and he has all the data in front of him, and it was interesting, right? Because if you make a birdie in a round, like that's one birdie seemed to be like, without you looking at the data, seemed to be like your kind of benchmark, right?
Yeah, I mean, like a birdie for me is the same thing as like me firing 2 tee balls out of bounds, basically. So his point, and you'll listen and you'll hear, is that's where a guy like me can make up a lot of the strokes, is focusing on the big scores versus the birdies, which we talked a lot about with John Sherman, who I know he's done a lot of work with too in the past. So a lot on that line of thinking, but it's cool. We talked a little bit about this too, but the adoption of kind of the non-swing coach, golf coach, which is a really cool thing for me, because I've always struggled with swing coach kind of stuff anyway. It's hard for me to take a lesson I get on a Tuesday to the first tee 2 weeks later. But people that can kind of help you talk through just strategy and also obviously have the stats to back it up are pretty cool.
Yeah. Just because you said it, I got to just bring it up. The difference between, I think the thing that will change that, and I felt the same way too. I think if you were able to have regular instruction and you're able to work away at small things, I've talked to Jenko a lot about this too. It's like the hard part about like, and I never had any progress with lessons because like you'd take one lesson and Jenko would tell me, yeah, people will like book a lesson with me and this guy expects me to solve everything. And then you go to the course and you're trying to work on 100 things where it's like, ideally you could find 1 or 2 things to chip away at. I think you would you're an athlete. I think you'd make a ton of progress.
It's just the same thing. Yeah. I was going to say, it's like, this is probably a bad analogy, but like a house or like a room in your house that needs like a fix or it needs a whole tear down. And it's like, I see these in 2 separate things. I know if I spent time with a Jenko, a swing coach, I would get a lot better, but I can't do that in a day or a week. I'd need the time, but there's little ways you can shave off little things to kind of carry you through. Yeah.
I think this stuff is super interesting, and this is an area where I'm trying to get much better. I didn't know that you tracked a bunch of stats anyway, but I think just bringing the lens of like, we do have such a recency bias, and like you hit 1 tee ball off the planet and you think that you need to work on driver, when like the reality is if you hit it to 30 feet more from 120 in, you'd be scoring a lot better. I think I don't have that. I track my game pretty well, like in my head, and but just like anything in life, it's like if you don't actually track it, you're not going to get any better. So I'm personally interested in. I have the Arcos stuff now. I'm interested in using that. But even if I didn't, I think I would be making much more consistent notes. One thing he said to you asked him about tracking putts. In this interview, Lou talks about why he doesn't think tracking putts is helpful. And I thought that was a really interesting part of this discussion. And he shares like the one metric. If you only picked one thing, he talks about what that is. And it's easy for everybody to track.
Yeah, that was an interesting part of the conversation to me too. It's about that. Everyone can kind of track their own stats, but I think I don't think he called it this, but the thing that how I took it was you really got to be aware of kind of tracking your intentions on the golf course versus results, which can be much, much different things, right?
Yeah, you also got to ask him about Scotty Scheffler, who, as we're recording this, fresh off a win at the Arnold Palmer, and obviously now the favorite to repeat at the Players now that he fixed his putting. But Lou seemed to think that he wasn't actually that bad of a putter.
No, that was, I mean, and we got into a little bit. I think I asked him this too. Is it more the kind of just the how jarring it is, how good his ball striking is that makes his putting seem so much more disastrous than it might be, where there's other guys on tour who aren't hitting the ball as well as Scotty, but are putting just as bad, and we don't hear about them either. I think is the point you made with JT.
Yeah. All right.
Was
Well,
that a
we
good
got
interview?
that conversation coming up. You're going to the Player. Are you going to go? You're going. You're going to the Players.
I guess we're gonna take a week off here, so we won't. This will be a good cliffhanger to leave on. Yesterday, again, I have a ticket. I'm not sure if I'm going. My wife yesterday said, "When are you going to decide if you're going to that golf thing or not?" Which I think was a bad sign for me. I was like,
When
"This
are you
isn't a
going to
really
this thing?
mine decision. This is a family decision." We'll see, though. I happen to be in the area just on Sunday, so we'll see if I pop over. But if so, you'll see me there with a sign on what is it, 17 there? Just says
Yes.
Scotty's not actually that bad of a putter, something like that. With a quote
All
from
right.
Lou.
You're going there. I'm off to Pinehurst.
Yeah, we should
And
set this up a little bit because the next time we talk, I think we're going to talk a few weeks with your coach and your buddy you're going down with, Jenko,
the
right?
doctor. Yeah. So we're there's every year there's a tournament. It's like they do all these like New England Pro-Am, it's like a way to get money to the golf course. They do them at different nice courses. There's
My
a
dad's
trip
actually
to
played in this one, by the way, at
he
Pinehurst, the
has
same one
with
that
the
you've played in.
with the web-handed guy.
Yes,
Love
same
that.
thing. I don't think
So
they threatened the top of the leaderboard, so or
no,
record book
so
to
we're
get there.
we're going to Pinehurst. We're going to be there Sunday through Wednesday, playing every day. I'm excited. Been hitting balls indoors since November. I cannot wait to see the ball go in the air. I mean, what a treat to be there with the guy who helps coach your golf game. It's like, I wish I hit the 8-iron here. He's like, no, don't hit the 8. Hit this one. Can't wait. And it's the first time that I've ever been to a real proper golf facility, and I'm interested to see in my reaction. Am I going to go down there and am I going to come back and I'm going to be talking about the bunkering and the green complex? Am I going to become that guy, or am I going to still be the same guy who's just played Pinehurst now? We'll see. I'm excited. I'm calling this now. I'm making a hole in one. There's a bold
Wow.
prediction.
Well,
Bold
let me just
prediction.
specify first, not on the cradle or on an actual course.
Doesn't matter, as we've discussed on this podcast. Doesn't matter
Okay.
whether it's in the Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon or on number 2. I don't know anything about any of the courses there. I'm not deep in the game. I'm not going to read up. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to go there and I'm going to play. And I'm going to make a hole in one. I'm just telling you now so we have it on the record. And if I don't, there's nothing to lose.
Well, there's a few holes on the cradle, especially what the time of day you play. If you're finishing when there's a lot of people watching, hole in one on the cradle might be just as good as on the actual course. Just as amount of like crowds there and vibes. It's
great.
Really, really cool place. At the end of the day, the cradle. But you're gonna have a blast. Number 2 is the best. You're playing number 4 too, right?
I think so. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are
You'll
the
like it.
good
You'll have a
ones?
blast.
What are the good ones?
Well, two is obviously the best. 4 is a Gil Hands design. That's
Okay, shout out.
he redid that recently. That's got a lot of Boston Golf Club vibes. You'll see that. I think we're going down a month after you, and I think 10 is the brand new one. I've never played that. I think it's 10. There's a course they built literally in 1 year. We were down there last year. They were putting shovels in the ground. It opens, I think, in 2 weeks. But 2 and 4 are your best. There's a few other ones that are some are member only courses that once in a while you'll get on if they have to they have too many people there. They got to get out different courses, but a lot of them other than 2 and 4 are pretty similar. Again, I've never played 10, but you'll have fun. I almost guarantee you're playing 4 too. It's right next to where 2 tees off. So, but no bad rounds
Can't wait.
there.
I got notes. We'll do a debrief when we come back. I can't wait. I'll send you pictures.
Awesome.
All right. Good luck.
And
Avoid
don't talk about avoid. I want you go down there. Avoid all the fish. Avoid any Disney related property.
Bro,
I don't want to hear another stomach bug story.
I'm eating peanut butter and jelly every day.
There you go. BYOB. Or BYOPB. There you go.
All right. Do you want to tell Rory to come on the pod?
Yeah, I'd love for Rory to come on the pod. I'm getting sick of saying it. Rory,
Roy
on the
needs
pod.
to get this golf game in shape. Is what he needs to do.
I know. Seriously, we're going to take a week off. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and hopefully by then we'll be talking about Players Champion Rory McIlroy, right? So Rory, come on the pod.
They played the long game.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Long Game Podcast. We have a great guest today. I'm excited about this one. He is in a world of golf Twitter that needs doses of reality. Lou, this is your expertise. He's a dose of reality on golf Twitter. He's a data nerd, a golf nerd, just like us. And he's someone that has shown me that I don't have to be thinking about hitting it to 2 feet every time I have a 56-degree wedge. And, I got 102 and I'm licking my chops. Lou says I don't worry about hitting it to 2 feet. He's Lou Stagner. Lou, welcome to the show. Big fan of yours. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the Long Game.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for having me. And a dose of reality. I've been called many different things. I haven't been called that yet. I think most of them are a lot more negative than a dose of reality.
Yeah, your mentions, man. People go hard in your mentions.
They do. Yeah, they do. You should see DMs. Sometimes they're even worse.
I can imagine. All right, we have a bunch of golf nerdy type questions that I want to dive into. Casey and I have a bunch of notes, but I think that you're prolific on Twitter, and one of the reasons why is it's not just because you have hot takes. I think you have one of the best things to be great at writing, at content online. It's because you have data. I just want to rewind back. You've told this on other places before, but just for us, if you could humor us, like, how did we get here? How did you turn this lifelong passion for golf into you becoming the data guy? What's the short version of the Lou Stagner story?
The short version is I've been the data guy for a long, long time. So I've been working in analytics in the corporate world before they called it analytics. So that's my background. That's what I've been doing for a long time. Been a golf nut forever. Tracked everything in a spreadsheet, starting in the mid 90s for my game. And then over 5 years ago now, I decided I was going to start a blog on golf analytics. Live in the Northeast, just wanted to kill some time in the long winters. I had some stuff that I thought was interesting and cool, and maybe a few people would see it, and started blogging about it, and it quickly blew up. And it's been kind of a crazy ride ever since. And I get to do things and talk to people that 6 years ago I would have said you're out of your mind if these things are going to kind of service themselves. So it's been a really fun ride. It's amazing to get to combine two passions, data and golf, and do those together in some really cool and fun ways. So it's been a lot of fun.
What did they call analytics back then before that? What was your term for it?
Business intelligence, I think, was one of the first things they started to call it. Like, I remember the company that I worked at 20 plus years ago, they started this thing called the Business Intelligence Group. And then before that, it was just reporting. And people didn't quite have words for it. And now I think analytics is a very common way that people refer to this stuff these days.
I'll tell you, the big has a nice ring to it, though.
The big.
It does.
I get a meeting with the big.
Part of the big group. Yeah, definitely.
Casey and I actually, the way that we met was we were interns at a tech PR agency right out of college, and seemed to be all the clients were in that space, big data. That was the cloud, big data, BI, analytics. And so I remember being like a 22-year-old that didn't know anything about anything. They're like, yeah, read this white paper about big data. Try to understand it.
Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff.
Are you is this become your full-time thing now, or do you still keep a salary in the corporate world?
No, I still work in the corporate world. So director of a team for a large company based out of Philadelphia. And I do that. And golf is, still a side thing for me. It'd be cool if one day it transitions away from that. But right now I'm still kind of doing both of those things. And it's nice because the the little involvement that I do have in golf kind of fits in nicely to evenings and weekends. There's a lot of people that they flip on Netflix at night. I flip open the laptop and I crunch numbers. So that's kind of my thing to do after the day ends.
And then you also now are an assistant golf coach at Princeton. When did that
Yeah.
come up?
I started helping out with the team with this is my third season with them, and I started helping out with them. And I, obviously I'm not a swing coach. They're all significantly better at golf than I am, and I do nothing in that world for them. But I help them out with mostly stats and analytics for the team, and help them prepare for events, help them analyze their data, which in turn helps them focus their practice time. And that's kind of the thing that I get to do with them. I get to travel to them as long as my travel with them as long as my schedule accommodates. So it's a lot of fun being able to go to tournaments and walk the course with the guys, and kind of be a part of what they're doing. It's an absolute blast, and we're doing really well. I think we're currently ranked 90th in the country, and the tail end of last spring, we got up to, I think, 68th was our best. Our last tournament of the year was not our best of the year, but when we fell a little bit down the rankings. But the team is doing fantastic, and I think we're only getting better, which is really cool. It's a lot of fun to be a part of it.
Do you find that 18 to 22-year-olds have trouble focusing on the stuff you're preaching, or are they just a sponge? They want to hear the analytics, all that kind of stuff.
I think it depends. It varies. I work with the players at Princeton, but I work with and have worked with several different college players over the last 5 years, and some are wide open, and they're like a sponge, and they want to know more and understand more. There's still a smaller percentage that maybe aren't as open to it, and if you ask them, they would probably classify themselves more as field players, is probably what they would tell you. uh, but I think for the most part, there's so many players in that age bracket that are embracing all of this data. They've grown up at a little different time. So strokes gained, they started using that on the PGA Tour in 2011, only for putting initially. Then they expanded it after that, and it's really started to blossom over the last 6, 7, 8 years. And so if you look at a 22-year-old, 8 years ago they were 14, and so they've kind of, we're getting to that point where a lot of the younger golfers are really growing up with this stuff. So it's becoming a part of the game, a part of what they do, a part of how they get better, and that's only going to continue to solidify over the next few years, until it's just going to be how you play golf. Is part of that is not only working on your swing, working on your mental game, but understanding your stats and applying that so you can get better. So that's where we're headed, and we're almost there now.
What's your pitch to that skeptic, the field player? Because I've seen a bunch of your stuff, and it's you know you're basically giving them a map to plot their way around course and
Yeah.
get better. And so it's almost like it doesn't matter that you're field player or not. Like, this is going to help you. But I'm curious, in your words, like, how do you tell that story to someone
Um,
who's skeptical?
yeah, typically I give two examples. There's one example. Sean Foley tells a story about when he started to work with Justin Rose, and Justin Rose thought he was a horrible wedge player, and Foley looked at the data, and Rose was like, I don't know, second in on the tour in strokes gained with his wedges. And Foley's like, what? We don't need to work on your wedge game. You're literally like, one of the top two players in the world with wedges. So we don't need to focus our attention there. And then the other example I give is my podcast co-host Greg Chalmers. And Greg Chalmers, a journeyman on the PGA Tour. He's 50 now. He just played in his first Champions Tour event. But Greg, in the ShotLink era, he's like top 3 putters in the ShotLink era. He's a phenomenal, incredible putter. He's one of the best putters to ever play golf. And he told a story about how, he thought his putting was off, and his putting just didn't feel right. And there was something going on. And his coach did the same thing, looked at the data and said, Greg, you are second on the PGA Tour right now in strokes gained putting per round. Like, what are you talking about? And I think those are two great examples of how we all as humans are pretty messy with how we understand what's going on. We have a challenging time, I think, aggregating data, and we fall into this rut of confirmation bias where all it takes is, one wedge swing at an inopportune time to maybe go belly up for you, and you immediately think, ah, boy, I'm a horrible wedge player. Like, and if it happens again, right, and if it happens again relatively quickly, now you start to confirm that, oh, I'm a bad wedge player. And now in your mind, you're telling yourself you're a bad wedge player when the data would completely disagree with that. And so I try to hammer home the notion that it's very challenging for us to kind of remove that bias that we all have, and without doing that, you kind of fall victim to what happened to Justin Rose and Greg Chalmers, where something happened in their game and they felt like it was really off, but it really wasn't. And those things can impact you, right? So if you have this feeling that you are a bad putter or a bad wedge player, that can start to impact you in a negative way. So to me, it's really important to understand what's actually going on and not what you think might be going on. And we can measure that uh, very complicated, granular ways to tell you a lot of information about your game. So it's better to have that information and act on it than try to guess and be wrong.
Well, most of the people that listen to this are not at the level of, man, what I would give to be 20 years old at Princeton and have golf be my, I think all of us would do that, to
Sure.
be our full-time job. But especially like if you want to get better in this setting and you only have a couple hours a week to play or practice, without the data of, where do you need to go and work on, to your point, Lou, like it might feel like I have this big miss left, but it's actually like, hey, I'm going to be able to lower my scores if I get better at, lag putting. And in the limited time that I have to practice, what should I be intentional about practicing? We had John Sherman on. I know you've talked to John. Actually,
Yeah.
one of your most viral tweets was John's swing, and we talked about this on our podcast. Where you often post like, guess the hand. You usually take it. It's usually a trick because it's usually a good player, and you're trying to prove that like many swings happen. So you post this video of John Sherman, who's a very good player. He's like a +2-3 handicap.
Yep.
Just got absolutely destroyed in the comments. Everybody thought he was like an 8 or a 10 or a 12,
or 15,
or a 15. Right.
Yeah,
I think I commented on that too. I was like, oh, I love this game where all the 15s tell the +2 that he's an 8.
I won't be sending in my swing.
No, don't.
Yeah.
There's no, unless you're Justin Thomas or Max Homa or Ludwig, there's no benefit to posting a video of your swing online.
Agreed. That's why you've never seen my swing.
I mean, right. Yeah. You should know, right? Like, know the things that people DM you and tweet you, like there's no chance you should ever post a video.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah.
But my point is John talks about this idea of, block practice, I think he calls it, where you're focusing on a specific skill set. I love that concept. It just gives you something to work on. So let's just talk about the average listener of the show who wants to get better. What are the things that you recommend they start tracking? What were you tracking back in this, original Lou spreadsheet in the mid 90s? And how does the average golfer who plays, once or twice a week, what do they track that helps them get better?
Yeah, well, I was tracking everything. I was tracking shot level information back then. So, where I started from, was it the fairway, how far I was to the hole, what kind of lie I had, where the flag was, where it ended up, what the wind direction was, how strong the wind was, was the moon full, all sorts of crazy stuff.
Wait, and were you just like writing this on the scorecard, or did you have a piece of paper? Like what?
Yeah, I had a system. I had a scorecard system, and if you looked at a scorecard after the round, it would look like almost like hieroglyphics. I mean, it was there's no way you'd have made sense of it. So I had this system that I did for every hole and kind of tracking all that stuff. And I love the fact that I don't have to do any of that anymore. With the tools that we have out there now. So for somebody that wants to start, like I answer that a couple of different ways. Like if you're serious about improving, and you do want to get better, you really need something that is going to to give you strokes gained information. That's without a doubt the best way to measure your game and understand performance. I consult at Arcos and work there, and it's a fantastic tool. And I'd love for you to use that. But if you don't want to use that and you're serious about your game, like you need to be tracking your strokes gained. I don't really care if you do it on the back of a napkin. That's a lot of work and a lot of effort, but you need that information if you're serious about improving. Now, there are some people that tell me, listen, I don't want an app. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. I want to write a few things down on my scorecard, and that's about all that I want to do, and I'm not interested. And for those people that just aren't quite interested in taking that step, I would tell them that they want to start tracking greens in regulation, really important stat. Very of all the traditional stats out there, very strong relationship to how well you're going to play, and is your handicap going to get better, going to get worse? Greens in regulation, how many penalty shots that you have, also an extremely, extremely important number. We want to minimize our penalty shots. And probably the last thing I would say, and this varies again depending on player, but for our higher handicap friends, I would want you to start tracking like how many like really horrible shots you have in a round of golf. And that means, you topped it, you skied it, you shanked it, like how many really horrible shots you had in a round of golf. That's kind of the last thing for our higher handicap friends. And then one more that's really important is, did you keep your tee shot in play? Like that's as far as tee shots go. I think there's a lot of people that start to measure their tee shot performance by hitting the fairway or not. And there's not a lot of value in that. There's very little value in hitting more fairways or hitting less fairways. I will caveat that by saying, there are some courses that have 4 or 5 inch rough. They don't have a big green staff. They cut the rough once a week. It gets pretty hairy certain days. There's definitely more of a premium on being in fairways in that situation, but that is by no means the norm for most of us. So keeping a tee shot in play is really important. So did you hit it reasonably well? Like, did you make reasonable contact? And do you have a reasonable chance to hit the green in regulation, be on or around the green in regulation on your next swing? If you can say yes to those, you've hit a great tee shot. Check that as a win. And those are the things you should be thinking of if you don't want to get to strokes gained. But I'll kind of circle back to that and say I would encourage someone, if they're serious about getting better, that you really need to be tracking strokes gained in shot level detail.
I noticed you didn't include putts on there. I keep a lot of those stats. I also keep putts. Is that something you keep as well, or is that separate?
Putts per round is pretty useless. Like putts per
Yeah.
round is going to be, like, I would say if you're doing that, like I've tracked that in the past many years ago. I've had the scorecard where you track greens and regulate, green hit, fairway hit, number of putts. A million people do that every round that they play. Putts per round is extremely misleading. Not sure what your handicap is, Casey, but if you went out and then you hit one green, you're probably going to have a lot fewer putts that day. If you went out and hit 18 greens, you're probably going to have a lot more putts that day. When you miss greens, you're typically somewhere around the green, and that next shot is likely to be closer than if you hit the green from 150 yards. And so you're starting a lot closer from the hole when you miss greens. And if you miss a ton of greens, you are going to have fewer putts. So very misleading, not useful stat. There's an old story from Gary McCord, if you remember him, the former announcer, played on tour for years. And he one year won the the award for the best fewest putts per round on the PGA Tour. And when he won and they gave it to him, he said something along the lines of, thank you for awarding me for being the lowest guy in greens in regulation this year, because that's essentially what it meant. Like the fewer greens you hit, the lower your putts are going to be.
And you're right. Yeah, the putting stat can be misleading, and this gets into something too. My father, I'm about a 10, 11 handicap. My father's a high teen handicap, but for years he's taken meticulous stats on the course, but not necessarily always the right stats, which I think we're getting into a little bit here and misleading. He's the kind of guy, he'll hit a ball out of bounds, hit a tree, it will come back in the middle of the fairway, and he's checking fairway hit. And I'm always saying to him, like,
Yeah.
what are you learning from that? Like
Yeah.
that you're going to play that off the tree. So that's an extreme example, but there is a little bit of in keeping stats to the question. And also, I have issues losing balls off the tee. So I'll almost keep like a hybrid stat of I'm trying to play middle right of this fairway. And if I miss it 3-5 yards right and it goes to the first cut, I'm still kind of checking that for directionally where I'm trying to play the ball versus like it could be up to an inch or 3 difference if you're fairway, if you're putting a check or an X on that. So can you talk a little bit about also interpreting like the stats and everything you're picking up out on the course, but making sure it's the right kind of stats you're playing? I think putting's a good example there too.
Yeah, that's why strokes gained is so beneficial to be leveraging strokes gained. That's going to give you, the most accurate um, guide to how you're performing on the golf course in each category: off the tee, your approach play, around the green, and your putting. That is definitely what you want to be moving towards if you're serious about understanding how your game is performing. You do bring up, and that strokes gain does have some drawbacks that I think you'll see start to go away over the next few years. Strokes gain simply treats everything the same. So if you have let's call it a 20-yard little chip shot around the green, and you're in the rough, and imagine you're very short-sighted. So you have 20 yards to the hole, and the hole is only cut 4 yards from the edge, and the green runs a little bit away from you. That's very different than if you have a same 20-yard shot and you're only 2 yards from the edge of the green and you have 18 yards of green to work with. Those are two very different shots, and strokes gained is not accounting for that at the moment, but I think you're going to see that start to change in the coming years. But it's still significantly better than some of the traditional stats. Now, your example of blasting one into the trees and coming back into the fairway, the opposite can also happen. You hit a really good shot and you get an extremely unfortunate break. You hit a sprinkler head in the middle of the fairway and the ball bounces another 50 or 60 yards and ends up in water. That's an unfortunate break against you. So those things do happen, and sometimes you need to consider those, but hopefully your good breaks and your bad breaks over the course of time are kind of washing out. If you are someone that always consistently thinks you have only good or only bad breaks, you probably don't. They probably do wash out some, but
Everybody plays with that guy who only gets the bad breaks.
Yeah, exactly.
You never hear the guy coming off the course saying, they all evened out today. It all equaled out. You don't hear that.
Hopefully they're relatively evening out for you. Now, it's not to say like in a single round that's not an issue, right? You could have two really horrible breaks in a round, and we've all been there before. It definitely does happen, and so it's not perfect, and there's no way right now to kind of notate or flag something like that and treat it differently. But strokes gained is much better than the traditional stats.
Hey Lou, okay, you start tracking all this data. You want to get better. I love that you mentioned greens. I just I'm not as big of a data and analysis guy as you are, but I do just in life, I always find that like the simplest advice is often the best advice. And so like if we trim this all down, it kind of does feel like greens in regulation is the one. Like you hit more greens, a lot of things are going to take care of themselves. Same way that like with your swing and mechanics, like it's kind of like hit the center of the club face more, and good things are gonna happen. I really like that. But out of all these things, what do you do with the data other than practice? Like, don't all roads eventually lead back to you need lessons? If you're the 16 handicap that starts tracking all this data, you're not just going to be in the office and yourself and creating a game plan. It's most likely going to be go and figure out what to work on with a coach, or no?
Well, I mean, a coach is certainly a huge part of the equation for so many players, and there's so many players that don't get lessons. They're not working with anyone. They're trying to go down that road alone, and that's a really challenging road to go down. And so I would encourage anyone that's trying to improve or wants to improve, they should go find a good instructor in their area. Or, there's some fantastic instructors online these days with some unbelievable platforms that, allow you to do remote lessons. I do remote lessons. I've done remote lessons, with two different teachers over the last few years, and they're fantastic. And they're, with the technology available today, it's very easy to do those things. And I think one of the benefits of tracking your data, is you can now show up to your lessons with really good objective information for your coach. You ask any coach, you can go talk to anyone that gives lessons right now and ask them, what do most people say to you when you start working with them? And nearly every golfer shows up to the first lesson and the coach says, well, what do you want to get out of this? And they say, well, I want to be more consistent. Well, what golfer doesn't? And that's, for the most part, that's about all that they get. And then they might get some, boy, I really need some work on my driver. And the coach is trying to untangle and figure all of this out, in a very short period of time. And they're going to maybe watch you take a few swings, and they're going to try to, quickly diagnose and understand. And we can remove so much of that by showing up with data and holding up your phone and saying, hey, look at my Arcos app, check out my data. This is what it looks like over the last 20 rounds. And then as you start to work on changes and try to get better at a specific part of the game, for example, you can actually see how you're doing. And you can interact with your coach on that and give that information back to the coach. And that really lets you know if what you're doing is starting to work or not. And so, you're right. Having a coach is extremely important. And when you can show up and give that coach information about what's actually happening with your game, that is extremely valuable to the coach. And that goes beyond, so like some of the confirmation bias that we have. Think back to 20 minutes ago with the Justin Rose and Greg Chalmers examples. They're going to show up to their coach and say, my wedge play is horrific. And now, if you do that, the coach might, focus that lesson on wedges with you. And if you show up and you have data and you can show what your wedge play actually looks like, your coach might say, hold on, time out. Like, look at this. You're actually really, really good at this part of the game. Like, I don't understand why you think you're not good at it. And then that's, well, that one time I was playing on Saturday and it was the last hole and we had $5 on the line, and, I missed the green from 100 yards. Well, okay, yeah, that's going to happen, but look at your performance over the last however many rounds. You're really good at that shot.
I love that. It's almost that's actually almost a better path. It's like before you go get lessons, come with the data. 'Cause then that's going to be your quicker path to getting better. It's almost like if you've ever had to do something with the doctor where you got to like track what you eat, and you're just like, look, I just want this. I just want the cure. And then you got to go home and track all the things that you eat and what you did. And then you come back and it's just like, I think that's a great idea. Not to plug Arcos, by the way, a friend of mine, a guy that I do business with, he sent me last year, he gave me a subscription to Golfer's Journal. This year gave me an Arcos subscription, and I haven't. So I'm a 2 handicap, Lou, and I've never tracked any data. And I'm like, this is my year. I'm like, I'm going to become data driven. So next week I'm going to Pinehurst. I have my first trip of the year. Nice. I got my Arcos. I'm going to get it all plugged in. Do you think as a lower handicap player who's never tracked anything, do you think I'm going to have a moment in a couple months?
Yeah, I think you're gonna get some amazing insights from looking at this data. Now, some of it, you may have some ideas on what parts of your game are good, what parts of your game are bad, and directionally, you're probably going to be pretty good there. But you're going to start to get into some more detailed data that's going to be extremely helpful to you. Now, I'll tell you that you definitely, at the end of every round, you want to go through and you want to make sure you validate your data. Arcos does a really good job at the heavy lifting of kind of tracking shots as you go. But after every round, I do it after every hole. I typically kind of have my phone on me, and I open it up and make sure the flag's in the right spot and just check my shots. It takes me 15 seconds. You're going to want to do that whatever works best for you, but you're definitely going to want to do that after every round just to make
Cool.
sure everything's correct. If your data is absolutely correct and you validated it, that's going to give you the best possible information. And I think you're going to find things about your game that are going to be really helpful to you. And I know with all the players that I've worked with, the Princeton team, they all use Arcos. I've had a number of players that have gotten insights from their game from Arcos, from tracking the stats that they otherwise wouldn't have known. And it's allowed us to kind of focus some of their practice time and also information for their swing coaches on things that they need to work on. And it's how you're going to get better. Like if you can identify the things that are the weakest and you can focus a little time on those, it's a pathway to getting better. And at your level, it's extremely important, right? If there's a 20 handicap or a 30 handicap, a relative beginner, the the most important thing for some of them is just make sure you're not hitting 4 inches behind the ball with your 9-iron.
Right.
That's kind of the step one for them. But for you, it's really important as a 2 index to it's hard for you to shave off another couple strokes, but you're going to be able to find some nuggets in this data that's going to help you get there a lot quicker than trying to do it on your own.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping. It's cool to hear you say that, because for me, it's about knowing what to practice. And then also I have a great coach. He's not with me all the time though. And so and like you said, we all have confirmation bias. We all have recency bias. I had a great round, but I had a left miss at a bad time. But the reality is I actually need to be working on my 100 and in game. I can't wait to get some of the data. What this is I wanted to ask you, this is a lead in from here. What would you say the biggest myth or false belief is that the average, or let's just say all amateur golfers, when they go and track their data, well, you've seen all the data, but
Yeah.
what are the biggest myths that that amateurs have about their actual golf games, reality versus what they think?
Yeah, well, there's probably a few ways to answer that. I think one of the big ones and one of the obvious ones is how far the ball is going. And I don't just mean with driver. Everybody on Twitter hits it 310 in the air with a little butter cut.
I love that.
I mean, sometimes people are, they're ambitious about how far they hit their irons on a consistent basis. And it's important to understand that there's a range of distances that you hit each of your clubs, and you're going to be able to get that from something like Arcos, and it's important to not always pick a club based on the absolute perfect strike. And if a perfect strike with your 9-iron goes 153, you don't want to. If you have 153 to a pin that's tucked 4 yards from the front edge and there's water you have to cover, probably not a good idea to hit your 9-iron, because you have to hit it basically perfect in order to cover that water. So you have to understand that there's a range of distances, and I think that's one of the biggest issues that amateurs have, and that's why when you look at the data, you can see how often they come up short, and some of that coming up short is because of mishits, right? But that just kind of folds into what we're talking about here, is that each iron has kind of a range of distances. Perfect, I absolutely smoked it. It's as good as I can hit it. It's going to go this far. All right, I didn't really hit that one good. It was, really heely. It was way on the toe, a little high on the face, and that one's going to go this far. It's important to understand those, how often they come out, and that is going to, help you hit more greens, which we kind of go back to, the one traditional stat that has a lot of importance is hitting more greens, and you're going to hit more greens by having a better understanding of how far something like your irons go.
Can you talk about birdies? So I think that was a good one. I had a feeling you would say that. My interpretation of that is carry distances. What a shocker! I'm going to make a broad generalization. Majority of people that listen to this podcast and your Twitter followers are men.
Yeah.
Is it surprising to you at all that men overestimating how long something is or how far something goes? It's just, it's like
Um,
everybody that I'm 36 years old, everybody that I know that played high school baseball threw 85, and I played high school baseball, and that was not the case. Not everybody threw 85. I wrote that down in my notes. Everybody on Twitter hits it 310 with a butter cut.
Everybody on, yeah. So I think it's universal, in golf is that I think when it comes to how far we hit it, we sometimes tend to remember just our best strikes, and we don't necessarily remember our worst strikes. But
Yeah.
I would want people to think of distance in terms of a range of, what is a mediocre to bad shot? How far is that going to go? And then how far is a perfect strike going to go? And that's kind of my range. And it's important to understand that and make sure you're kind of factoring that in. But yeah, I think we're all guilty of that. I'm sometimes even guilty of that, even though, it's hard to, sometimes it's hard to move away from that.
Yeah.
But it's something that will help you if you get better at it.
Well, I think the reason why we're guilty of it is because it's easy to have the default to like the 1.5 smash factor, the perfectly center that it just doesn't happen all the time.
It
Next thing I
doesn't.
want to talk about is birdies.
Yeah.
This is one that you shed a lot of light on for me, and I'm trying to get down to scratch I'm on that journey, and I'm like, got to make more birdies. I play great when I make more birdies, but you actually myth busted that one, and you don't need to make more birdies. I've seen you talk about oftentimes scratch players, they're going to play very boring golf. Can you talk about the unnecessary quest for more birdies?
Yeah, birdies they are not the key to lower scores, and a lot of people think that they are. The key to lower scores is you're trying to go from, Casey said he's a 10. The key going from a 10 down to a scratch isn't more birdies. I can look up real quick. So a scratch player averages 2.2 birdies per round. How many birdies per round do you think a 10 index averages? Casey,
I
I'm
can
going to
tell
let
you,
you
you don't
answer
have
that
to
one.
ask.
How many?
0, less than 1.
They average less than one. So they average 0.7. So there's 1.5 birdies per round difference between a scratch and a 10. So there's 10 shots of skill difference between a scratch and a 10. And 1.5 of those is because of more birdies. That is not, that's not going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is reducing the number of doubles, others, and bogeys, and taking your bogeys and turning those into pars, turning your doubles into bogeys, turning your triples and others into doubles. It's reducing the big numbers. That's where the gains are. It's not in more birdies. The best players on the planet, PGA Tour players, they average 3.7 birdies around. That's they only make 3 more birdies per round than a 10 index on the average. They're a lot better than 10 index players. There's 20 plus shots of difference there depending on the course. And only 3 of those are because of more birdies. So that's not the key to getting that handicap down. It's reducing the non-par numbers.
I want to ask you about a couple of the professional players too, but first, is there a player that you see? I know it's probably a hard question, not being fully in everyone's camp, but is there a player you see that really embraces what you're talking about most? I think maybe the easy answer is Matt Fitzpatrick, but is there someone you just heard from through quotes or just observing that really leans into the stuff you're preaching?
Well, I think there's a lot of players now that are moving towards that, and a lot that you wouldn't know. So Arcos just partnered with Eduardo Molinari, so they announced that last week. Molinari, he, former Ryder Cupper, former U.S. Amateur champion. He was the brains behind the analytics with the European Ryder Cup team. He's now the European Ryder Cup vice captain, and he's now part of Arcos. And he works with more than 35 different tour players, including Matthew Fitzpatrick. Matthew's one of his clients. Fitzpatrick. He works with Hovland. He works with Nelly Korda on the LPGA, and more than 30 other tour pros. And there's a lot of tour pros that are now, understanding the benefit of looking at their game through the lens of this data to help them focus where they need to focus, to help them get better, to improve their strategy. He works with them on all of those things, and that's just going to continue to grow. And this partnership with Arcos is going to, I think, accelerate some of that. And you're going to see a lot of additional players kind of come into the mix, not only at the PGA Tour level, but at levels below that as we move forward. So it's just going to, we're at the very beginning. We're kind of scratching the surface with what's going to be possible with analytics. And we are kind of at the beginning of it being just a mainstay in the game for all the players out there. As some of the older players, which I hate to stereotype, but some of them are less likely to be, analytics inclined, if I can put it that way. But the younger players, they are very much different than that, as a stereotype. And as some of the older players age off the tours and the younger ones come on, it's just going to continue to expand and accelerate. So it's really cool. It's awesome to have Eduardo kind of part of the Arcos family now. And that's not to say I won't try to sabotage his work with the European Ryder Cup team. I've already told him that directly a couple times.
It's funny you bring him up to as an example, because I'm a big professional golf consumer. I've been a huge fan of the Ryder Cup for years and years too. And this is the first year, this past Ryder Cup, that I remember. They've always talked about setup and advantages, but the first year I heard so much analytics used into the argument of, I guess Eduardo's responsible for making those fairways so narrow in Rome, because they looked at the data, right, and said the Americans' advantage is approach shots, right, wedges. So let's get as many of those out of their hands as we can. This is the first Ryder Cup I've heard so much of the analytics part. I've heard it referred to in the past about setup advantages for home and away, but that's an interesting point. On tour, I want to talk a little bit about Scotty Scheffler, because we're recording this on a day after Bay Hill, where he just won yesterday on the back of a pretty impressive strokes gain putting around on Sunday. But leading into that, I'm not sure people or the average fan really understands what his struggle has really been and how unprecedented it is. Can you just dive into a little bit of Scotty Scheffler, probably the last 6 months or really this season, just how unprecedented it is, his ball striking versus his struggles with the putter, which hopefully he's back on track. But if he does get that putter back on track, what does that mean for his game?
I mean,
and the tour?
I think it's been a little misleading. I definitely think it's been a smidge misleading. Like going into this, I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say he was losing like maybe 0.6 of a shot per round with his putter. I think JT's been putting worse than him, this year over the last 6 months, and not hearing a whole lot about JT's putter, right?
And he's doing it in joggers, so it's like 10 times worse. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know if the joggers are better or worse, but that is an accurate statement. He's doing that.
Is it the ball striking that creates such a difference that it makes it so much more the spotlight more on Scotty for this versus the JT, because his strokes gain approach and off the tee has been so great?
Yeah, his ball striking has been unbelievable. So there's definitely a gap, and he's clearly been top 5 in the leaderboard countless times, and had a really sketchy putter. But it's not like he's people think he's putting like the typical 10 index. He's not. I can promise you, Casey, that if you and Scotty had a putting contest, like you don't stand a chance. He's going to beat you one-handed with his eyes closed. Like and sort of the thought process out there was he was putting like the typical weekend warrior, and that just wasn't the case. He's the number 1 player in the world. He was getting a lot of highlights, on his putting, and he missed some putts from in tight in some situations, and those kind of things do really well on Twitter, right? When you get the best player in the world to miss a 2.5 footer, that's going to get some views, and those views kind of amplified it. Not to say that he didn't have a lot of opportunity to improve his putting. He did. And if he does get a hot putter, He is going to be devastatingly good. That was one of the reasons why Tiger was so good. His putter was phenomenal. In the ShotLink era, he's like top 20 strokes gained putting in the ShotLink era, like on a strokes gained per putt basis. And when you factor in some other things that make it tougher to putt, like the later in the day that you play, the harder it is to putt. And Scotty certainly deals with that because he's a good player and he plays a lot of late tee times on the weekend. And Tiger was very much like that. When you factor that in, and how good of a ball striker Tiger was, and how good of a ball striker Scotty is, that it's tougher to putt well when you are that good of a ball striker and you're performing that well. So there's a little bit of a relationship between strokes gained approach and strokes gained putting. The better your strokes gained approach is, the harder it is to putt. And there's a few nuances that go into that, but Scotty's a little bit behind the eight ball with having so many late rounds, and being such a good ball striker that it kind of makes his putting. Think of it like having kind of a perpetual bad weather draw for your putter is a way to think of it. But boy, if he can go to gaining 0.3 of a shot per round with his putter, he is going to win a lot of golf tournaments.
And another thing I wanted to get your take on in the professional game is just the whole thing around the rollback. I'll let you go. Just let us know your thoughts.
We got 6 hours. We got 6 hours here.
Well, I would say specifically, I've heard a lot about rollback from a ton of people online, but I'm interested to something specifically to your industry is just this. I don't think a lot of people are talking about the data set you guys work off of is based on a certain equipment, ball manufacturing. So just in what you do, how would that affect you? And again, I'll give you the floor.
Boy, there's so many different directions we can go with this. It doesn't really, impact me in any way, shape, or form directly. As is what I'm doing with the numbers. But it impacts golfers, right? We're all going to get shorter. Pros a couple years earlier than us, and then the amateurs 2030. So pros January 1st, 2028, and then we're supposed to be January 1st, 2030. And to me, it's a bad idea on so many different levels. At the amateurs need more distance, not less. So making us shorter is a bad idea. We have a problem now where people are playing golf courses too long for how far they hit the ball. Like the USGA started the Tee It Forward campaign in 2011. And that's because too many golfers are playing tees that are too long for how far they hit it. So they started this campaign to encourage people to tee it forward. That was what their entire campaign was about. They did that in conjunction with the PGA of America. And amateur distance hasn't changed since then. It's basically flat since then. And so doing this at the amateur level makes absolutely no sense. Doing it at the professional level, in my opinion, also makes absolutely no sense. And they're going to, I've heard a lot of, reasoning around this where, well, people didn't want to bifurcate, so we have to do it for everybody. We're just kind of listening to what you said. You didn't want it for only pros, so we're just going to do it for everyone. Well, if you rewind, the USGA kind of came out and said, we're thinking about doing this, and they got some feedback. And the feedback was, we don't want you to do this. And then the USGA said, all right, we're only going to do this for pros. And then they got feedback, and the industry as a whole said, nope, we don't want you to do that either. And then so the USGA said, well, you know what, we're going to do it for everybody. And to me, it's just such a short-sighted decision that makes no sense, in my opinion. And I think it's going to do more harm than good at the amateur level. And at the tour level, like, they haven't really thought this through like many of their other decisions. There's not a whole lot of science going on over there. And Dr. Sasha McKenzie, who's a biomechanist, probably the smartest guy in golf, he brought up a really interesting point that, they are very you're very likely going to see tour pros very quickly overcome this rollback because they are going to be allowed to swing faster. Right now, how far offline tour pros hit the ball is mostly a function of how far the ball goes. So if you think of yourself standing on a tee, dispersion, like how far left and right you hit it, you're standing kind of at the point of a triangle, and your dispersion is kind of triangle shaped, and it's going to be a certain width up at the top, and that width is dictated mostly by how far the ball goes. So right now you have, almost, 100, creeping up on 116 mile an hour average swing speed on tour. And the average distance on tour is about 300 yards. If they roll everybody back to 285, what's going to happen now is that dispersion is going to get tighter, right? So the dispersion is going to get tighter, which now means players are going to be able to swing faster to get the ball back out to 300 yards. And dispersion is going to get wider, but it's going to kind of go back to where it was. So you're probably going to very, very quickly see average swing speed on tour go from 116 to 120, 121 in a very, very short period of time, right? And they're actually putting more priority on distance with a rollback. And there's a lot of folks out there that say, we need to roll the ball back to reduce the importance on distance. And that's just not accurate. Like even in the USGA's um, own data, the USGA, the Distance Insight Report, the 100-page document that everyone thinks of, that's actually a summary from about 60 different sub-reports. And one of the sub-reports in there looked at the importance of distance and accuracy over the years. And distance was most important in the 80s. And that's because what happens is the farther you get from the hole, the bigger the gap in scoring gets. And so let me put that in context. The shortest hitters are, call it about 40 yards shorter than the longest hitters on tour. And let's say it's a par 4, and the longest hitter is going to have 120 yards remaining. The shortest hitter is going to have 160. Now, if we roll it back, and let's just make the math easy, and let's say we roll it back 20 yards, and we roll it back, and now it's 140 versus 180. The average shots to hole out from 120 to 160 is smaller than it is from 140 to 180. So as we push the entire field back, what's going to happen is the scoring gap is going to get a little bit bigger between the long and the short hitters, which is going to put more of a premium on distance. I could literally talk about this for another 10 hours. It's mind-numbing to me that they made this decision. It's so much of their own data. I could stand here, and I've talked about this, I've written about this. I could stand here for hours and give you data from their own studies that refute so many of the things you hear USGA leadership saying. It just makes absolutely no sense to me what the direction that they're going down here.
This is great because you just ruined Casey's afternoon. The data guy comes with the data, and now he's questioning everything he ever thought. That's right. Lou Stagner, Patrick Cantlay, all say don't roll it back, Case. Like
I was going to say, it makes sense why Rory is for this, right?
100%.
Hey, okay, real quick.
Yeah.
We got to let Lou go, but I can't let him off. We got to ask you this question. Every week we do a segment. Casey and I ask in or OB. It's like buy or sell. We asked this one last week. You've tweeted about it, but I want to ask you about it. On a par 3, tee it up or no tee? Is it okay to go no tee? Should you always tee it up?
I would say tee it up. Like from the people that I've talked to about this, you're going to get more grass clippings and stuff in between the club face and the ball when the ball is sitting on the ground versus being on a tee. And so, not teeing it up introduces, more stuff in between the golf ball and your face, which then leads to, the ball maybe not spinning how it typically would, or the ball being knocked offline a little bit more than it typically would. So I would
That's
tell
a great
you to,
answer. I
to
had
tee
not
it
I
up.
had not thought of that angle. Case.
Well, now you've ruined
Or
Dave's day.
no, it's great. It's great. It makes total sense. I want clean face contact. I will never
Yeah.
not tee it up again. You know what? That's why you just do the Laura. Lou posted about this last time. Let's just do the Laura Davies. Just get on the first tee.
Oh man. Yeah, that's crazy. Like I
I
wouldn't
think
do
he
that.
posted like,
Yeah.
how about just use a tee?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a fan of that, but yeah, use a tee. I would definitely say use a tee.
All right,
I
Lou, we'll
forget-
let you go.
No, I
You got-
forget who. This is an important one, so I forget who did this. But somebody has some really, really fascinating, like slow motion video of iron shots from a tee versus the turf, and like
Mm.
you can see in slow motion how much debris gets picked up, even when you're making pretty good contact. Like I'm not saying you're hitting 2 inches behind the ball, but I'll have to find that. I'll send it to you because it
Cool.
certainly will change how you think about. Instead of just tossing a ball on the ground on a par 3, like you probably should tee it up.
Yeah, I think it's just a great answer because I like anything in life. I think having a reason for why or why not to do something is very useful. So,
Sure.
Lou, thank you, man. You delivered. You're awesome. Go follow Lou Stagner on Twitter. This is where we get all this stuff from. Him and John Sherman are my two must follow guys if you want to get better at golf outside of the golf swing. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks,
Enjoy the
guys.
rest of your day. We'll
Appreciate
be
you
rooting for
having
the Tigers. Go Tigers, man.
Go Tigers.
All right.
Thanks, Lou.
See you, dude.
He's talking the long game.
They played the long game.
They've got to play the long game.
They're experienced and they played the long